Do you live in El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, or Honduras? Do you live anywhere near the Pacific coast of Central America? If the answer is yes, you need to watch this entire video, because what is unfolding right now across this region is one of the most dangerous tropical setups we have seen this early in a hurricane season in years. Not one storm, not even close, two tropical systems, born within hours of each other, both churning across the same stretch of warm Pacific water, both aimed at the same communities, the same mountainsides, the same valleys where families are sleeping tonight. Their names are Boris and Cristina, and together they have already changed everything for millions of people across Central America and southern Mexico. This is not a situation where meteorologists are watching a storm form on a satellite loop and wondering what might happen in a week. This is happening right now, today, June 10th, 2026. The National Hurricane Center in Miami has already issued tropical storm warnings stretching from Nicaragua to the Guatemala and El Salvador border. Schools have been closed across El Salvador. Fishermen have been ordered off the water in La Libertad, a port town just 35 kilometers south of the capital San Salvador. Entire fishing communities sitting along that coastline are watching the sky and the sea and waiting. The question is not whether this rain is coming. It is already coming. The question is how much of it falls, how fast, and what it does when it hits ground that cannot absorb another drop. So let us walk through exactly what is happening, where these storms are right now, and why this particular combination of factors has forecasters genuinely alarmed. Tropical storm. Boris formed on Monday, June 8th in the eastern Pacific, becoming the second named storm of the 2026 Pacific hurricane season. It had maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour when it was first classified, and it moved with intention directly toward the coast of southern Mexico. Early Tuesday morning, June 9th, Boris made landfall near Acapulco in the Mexican state of Guerrero. By Tuesday evening, its center had become increasingly difficult to locate on satellite. Wind shear was tearing its structure apart. The National Hurricane Center downgraded it to a post-tropical cyclone. By later that night, Boris was officially gone. But here's the problem. Boris did not leave quietly. Before it fell apart, it had spent days spinning and drawing moisture from an eastern Pacific that is running significantly warmer than normal for this time of year. And all of that moisture, those training bands of heavy rain, those sheets of water that poured down on the states of Guerrero and Oaxaca, did not just evaporate when Boris stopped being a named storm. The terrain of southern Mexico is mountainous and steep. Guerrero and Oaxaca are cut by ravines, rivers, and slopes that funnel rainfall into rivers that can rise within hours. The remnants of Boris are expected to drop an additional 1 to 4 inches of rain across those coastal portions of those states. On ground that has already been saturated on rivers that are already running high, even a few more inches is not a minor inconvenience. It is the difference between a swollen river and a river that consumes the road, the bridge, and the village sitting beside it. And that is just the remnants of one storm that is technically over. Tropical storm. Cristina is the story that is still being written tonight. Cristina formed Monday afternoon, the same day as Boris, off the Pacific coast of Nicaragua. It became the third named storm of the 2026 Eastern Pacific hurricane season. When it was first classified, its center was just west of Managua, the Nicaraguan capital. Since then, it has barely moved. That is the word forecasters keep using. Barely. Stationary. Nearly motionless. As of this morning's 3 a.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center, Cristina was located approximately 100 miles south-southeast of San Salvador, El Salvador. Maximum sustained winds near 40 miles per hour with higher gusts, moving at roughly 3 miles per hour, drifting, meandering, refusing to commit to a track. And by this morning's midday advisory, it had already been downgraded to a tropical depression with maximum sustained winds of 35 miles per hour. Now, this next part matters. When people hear a storm has been downgraded, they often assume the threat is over. With Cristina, the downgrade means almost nothing when it comes to the real danger, because the National Hurricane Center made it explicitly clear in its latest advisory that, and I want to make sure you understand this the way forecasters understand it, the primary hazard from Cristina has never been its winds. It has always been its rainfall. A storm sitting nearly stationary off the coast of El Salvador, drawing moisture from an abnormally warm Pacific, can dump extraordinary amounts of rain over the same locations for day after day. The NHC forecast calls for widespread rainfall, totals of 4 to 8 inches across coastal portions of Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala through Thursday morning, with locally isolated maximum accumulations reaching 12 inches. AccuWeather's local StormMax forecast pushes that to 24 inches in some mountainous zones. Let that sink in. 24 inches of rain in the mountains above cities that are already on alert. And that is not even the most alarming part of the rainfall picture, because Cristina is expected to approach the coastline, possibly making landfall somewhere between El Salvador and southern Guatemala, before gradually weakening. That approach tonight into Thursday means the heaviest rainfall is still ahead for some of these communities. The worst is not behind them. For families in coastal El Salvador and the Pacific lowlands of Guatemala, tonight is the night that will determine a great deal of what comes next. Most people watching a storm tracker online are focused on the swirling center, the cone of uncertainty, the track. What they are missing with Cristina is something called training rainfall bands. When a slow-moving or stationary tropical system sits near a coast, it does not just rain once and stop. Bands of heavy thunderstorms wrap around the center and march over the same locations repeatedly for hours, sometimes for an entire day. Each band drops its rain in the same valley, over the same hillside, into the same river basin. The ground saturates. The rivers fill. And when the next band arrives, there is nowhere for the water to go except across roads, into homes, and down hillsides in the form of mudslides. That is the mechanics of what forecasters are warning about right now across Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Not a single catastrophic downpour, but a relentless, repeating cycle of heavy rain over the same ground for days. El Salvador has already moved into emergency posture. The Education Ministry shut down schools and universities on Tuesday and Wednesday. Fishermen in La Libertad were ordered to stay in port as strong waves battered the harbor. That port, sitting on the Pacific coast, was already being lashed by heavy surf before the center of Cristina even approached. The government is not waiting to see what happens. They are reacting to what the models are telling them. And those models are telling them something that any experienced forecaster along this coastline will tell you deserves serious respect. But that is not the real story yet, because this is where it becomes dangerous in a way that goes beyond just one country, one coastline, one storm. Central America's terrain is the hidden amplifier in every tropical flooding event. El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua are not flat places. They are cut by volcanic mountains, steep river valleys, and hillside communities where tens of thousands of people live on slopes that were never designed to channel or absorb this kind of rainfall. When 8 to 12 inches of rain falls in the mountains above San Salvador, the water rushes downhill into river systems that feed directly into urban areas. The Lempa River Basin in El Salvador, the volcanic highlands of Guatemala, the mountains of southern Honduras, these are places where the landscape itself becomes a weapon when the skies open up for days at a time. AccuWeather lead hurricane expert Alex De Silva put it directly this week. Flash flooding and mudslides from locally excessive rainfall are the main threats from Cristina. Not winds, not storm surge. Rain and the ground beneath it. Think about what a mudslide actually means in this part of the world. It means a hillside community wakes up in the middle of the night to the sound of the mountain moving. It means roads disappear. It means people who need to evacuate cannot, because the route out is gone. It means rescue workers who need to reach affected areas cannot, because the bridges that connect them no longer exist. This is not abstract. This is a physical, documented reality in Central America whenever a slow-moving tropical system unloads rainfall on terrain that cannot absorb it. And now it gets worse. There's a historical precedent for exactly this kind of scenario, and it is one that the entire region still carries in its memory. The name is Mitch. Hurricane Mitch made landfall in Honduras in late October of 1998, weakened to a Category 1 by the time it hit the coast, but then stalled. For days, the system barely moved, drawing moisture from both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean simultaneously. It dropped nearly 75 inches of rain in some locations. At the Casita volcano in Nicaragua, water filled the volcanic crater and caused a partial collapse, triggering a cataclysmic mudslide that killed more than 2,000 people in a single event. In the Honduran city of Tegucigalpa, rivers burst their banks and swept away entire informal settlements before residents could escape. By the time the rains finally ended, more than 11,000 people were confirmed dead. Thousands more were listed as missing, and the final toll was almost certainly higher. More than 2 million people were displaced. Honduras alone suffered damages estimated at $5 billion, in a country whose entire annual national budget at the time was just $1 billion. 20% of Honduras's population was left homeless. 70% of the country's crops were destroyed. The country's economy shrank for years afterward. What made Mitch so catastrophic was not its peak intensity. It was its slowness. It was the way it sat over the same mountains and valleys and kept raining day after day, long past the point where the ground had any capacity to absorb more. The rain had nowhere to go but down, and down it went, taking everything in its path. Cristina is not Mitch. Nobody is saying it is. The wind speeds are far lower, the circulation is weaker, and the scale of moisture is different, but the mechanism is the same. A slow-moving tropical system, nearly stationary in some periods, sitting off the Pacific coast of Central America, drawing moisture from above normal sea surface temperatures, dropping rainfall on steep terrain day after day. That mechanism has killed thousands in this part of the world before, and that is exactly why the National Hurricane Center used the phrase, life-threatening flooding and mudslides in its official advisory wording. That is not casual language. Those are words meteorologists choose very deliberately. One more thing you need to know before we get to where things stand right now. Both Boris and Cristina formed from what had been a very active stretch of tropical weather across the eastern Pacific in early June 2026. They became the second and third named storms of the 2026 Pacific hurricane season, and they arrived on top of the remnants of Tropical Storm Amanda, which had already fizzled before them. No AA has projected a 70% chance of above normal tropical activity for the Pacific this hurricane season. The driver behind that elevated forecast is El Niño, which is intensifying. El Niño warms sea surface temperatures across the eastern and central Pacific to above normal levels, creating the fuel that tropical systems feed on. The same warm water that energized Boris and Cristina is already sitting out there, waiting for the next disturbance that comes along. What you're watching this week is not an isolated event. It is the opening statement of what meteorologists expect to be a very active tropical Pacific season. And now the focus shifts to what happens next. As of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center on Wednesday, June 10th, Cristina was located at approximately 5 degrees north latitude, 88, 8 degrees west longitude. That puts it about 85 miles south-southeast of San Salvador, El Salvador, and about 165 miles southeast of Puerto San Jose, Guatemala. The system has weakened to a tropical depression with maximum sustained winds of 35 miles per hour. Central pressure holding at 1,007 millibars. It is stationary at this hour. Stationary. That word again? The forecast track brings Cristina toward the coastline of El Salvador or southern Guatemala sometime tonight into Thursday. Even as a tropical depression, even with wind speeds that are technically below tropical storm threshold, the rainfall potential does not diminish when the circulation weakens. The moisture is already there. The bands are already organized. The mountains are already receiving rain that has nowhere to go. A landfall somewhere along the El Salvador to southern Guatemala coastline is expected before the system gradually weakens further inland. But here is why this is serious for a wider audience than just those living directly in the storm's impact zone. Meteorologists at AccuWeather and elsewhere have identified a scenario where Cristina's energy, or remnant moisture, could cross Central America and reach the southwestern Gulf of Mexico later this week. If that happens, there's a non-zero chance that the energy regenerates or helps initiate a new center in the Gulf. Even if that does not happen, the moisture plume associated with Cristina's remnants is being tracked as a potential driver of heavy rainfall across the southern United States, including Texas and the broader Gulf Coast, later this week and into the weekend. UPI's meteorology coverage noted this week that the remaining moisture from Cristina may drift into Texas or spread east along the Gulf Coast in the form of tropical downpours. Sea surface temperatures across much of the Gulf are sitting above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the threshold required to support tropical development. If the circulation survives the crossing of Central America with enough organization, the warm Gulf water would give it every reason to try to reorganize. For people living in coastal Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, this is not the moment to stop paying attention. It is the moment to watch what happens over the next 48 to 72 hours very carefully. But let us come back to Central America, because the story there is not finished. It is, in many ways, just beginning. Think about what the families in these communities are experiencing right now. In the coastal towns of El Salvador between La Libertad and the Guatemalan border, fishing communities that depend entirely on access to the sea have already been shut down. Boats are tied up, the docks are off limits. The harbor at La Libertad was being battered by waves even before Cristina approached. School-aged children across El Salvador spent Tuesday and Wednesday at home, their schools closed by government order. Farmers who planted beans and corn and coffee on hillside plots are watching the sky and the soil and knowing that what falls from the sky in the next 24 hours could wash away months of work. In Guatemala's Pacific coastal lowlands, near the departments of Escuintla and Santa Rosa and Jutiapa, communities that have flooded before are already watching the rivers. And this next part matters for understanding what the next 24 hours could mean. Central America's response capacity to flooding disasters, while improved since the Mitch era, remains limited by geography. Many of the communities most at risk sit at the end of road networks that can be severed by a single mudslide or a single washed-out bridge. When those roads go down, the communities behind them are isolated. Rescue teams cannot get in. Supplies cannot move. People who need medical attention cannot get out. This is not a hypothetical. This has happened repeatedly in this region when tropical systems stall and drop rainfall over multiple days. The combination of steep terrain, vulnerable infrastructure, and a slow-moving storm is a combination that disaster management officials in these countries have been responding to for decades with varying degrees of success. What is different about this week, and what makes this setup particularly challenging for emergency responders, is that Boris arrived first. Before Cristina even had a name, Boris was already saturating southern Mexico and driving moisture southward. Some of that moisture loaded the atmosphere above Central America with additional humidity before Cristina even became a named storm. The ground receiving Cristina's rainfall is not starting from a dry baseline. It is receiving water on top of water on top of water. And tonight changes the timeline. Cristina is forecast to approach the coastline between El Salvador and southern Guatemala overnight into Thursday. That landfall window, if it occurs, would place the circulation and its heaviest rain bands directly over the Pacific coastal plain of Guatemala and El Salvador during the overnight and early morning hours, when residents are asleep, when visibility is zero, and when the sound of a mudslide or a flood surge moving down a valley may be the first warning anyone gets. The mountainous terrain of Guatemala and El Salvador is not forgiving terrain for flash flooding. The departments of Jutiapa, Santa Rosa, and Escuintla in Guatemala, and the coastal departments of El Salvador's Pacific lowlands sit at the base of mountain ranges that funnel every drop of rainfall that falls on the highlands directly into rivers and streams that drain toward the coast. When those rivers come up fast, and they can come up very fast within 1 to 2 hours of heavy rainfall in the mountains, the communities in their paths have very little time. Emergency management officials in both countries are urging residents in at-risk areas to move to higher ground before nightfall if they have the ability to do so. AccuWeather's local storm maximum forecast of 24 inches in isolated mountainous locations is the number that meteorologists are most concerned about. That figure represents a worst-case but meteorologically realistic scenario in specific areas where storm bands are expected to focus over the same terrain repeatedly. 24 inches of rain in 48 to 72 hours over a steep volcanic hillside is not a rainfall event. It is a geological event. It changes the shape of the land. It moves rocks and soil and trees and anything built on the slopes down into the valleys below. Now the focus shifts to what this means for the broader picture of this hurricane season. What you are watching this week with Boris and Cristina is, according to current forecasts, just the beginning of what is expected to be a historically active Eastern Pacific hurricane season. El Niño is intensifying. Sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific are running above their seasonal average. The atmospheric dynamics that produce tropical storms and hurricanes in this basin are being fed by unusually warm water that extends across a broad swath of ocean. The conditions that gave birth to Boris and Cristina on the same day, June 8, 2026, two named storms forming almost simultaneously in the same general region, are conditions that forecasters expect to persist and potentially intensify as the summer progresses. This matters beyond just the current event. It means that communities in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and southern Mexico that survive what Cristina is about to deliver are going to face these decisions again, possibly several more times before the season ends. Emergency stockpiles will need to be replenished, damaged infrastructure will need to be repaired, and communities that have already been destabilized by flooding in the next 24 to 48 hours will need to do all of that while still managing the aftermath of what Cristina is producing right now. There is also a scenario that forecasters have not ruled out. And this is the part that extends this story beyond Central America entirely. As Cristina moves inland and eventually weakens over the Central American landmass, its remnant moisture does not disappear. The atmosphere carries it, the pressure patterns steer it, and the southwestern Gulf of Mexico is sitting right there, warm and waiting. AccuWeather's meteorologists described this week the possibility that Cristina's energy could reach the southwestern Gulf later this week and potentially regenerate or help initiate a new center. Even if that does not happen, the moisture associated with those remnants could fuel heavy rainfall across Texas and the Gulf Coast as early as this weekend. For cities like Houston, Corpus Christi, and Galveston, and for communities across southern Louisiana, this is a development worth watching closely over the next 72 hours. Texas does not need to be in Cristina's direct path to feel Cristina's consequences, but that is still hours and days away. Right now, tonight, the most urgent story is on the Pacific coast of Central America. Cristina is sitting just 85 miles south-southeast of San Salvador. It is nearly stationary. It is about to move toward shore. The National Hurricane Center's official advisory language includes the phrase life-threatening flooding and mudslides, especially in areas of steep terrain. Tropical storm warnings remain in effect. Schools are closed, fishermen are grounded. Families in coastal communities are watching the water rise. The region has been here before. They know what slow-moving tropical rainfall can do. They know it because Mitch taught them in 1998. In a way that a generation never forgot. More than 11,000 people dead, more than 2 million displaced. Villages in Honduras and Nicaragua buried under mud before anyone could get out. An entire region's economy set back for years. The lesson of Mitch, repeated in every emergency management briefing given in Central America since, is that the most dangerous tropical system is not always the strongest one. It is the slowest one. The one that parks itself over mountains and refuses to leave. Cristina has been refusing to leave for 3 days. The next 12 to 24 hours will determine how history records this event. Whether the rainfall totals stay toward the lower end of the forecast, whether the communities most at risk were warned in time and had the ability to act on those warnings, whether the slopes hold or whether they move, whether the rivers crest and recede or crest and keep rising, none of those answers are certain right now. What is certain is that the atmospheric setup is serious, the official warnings are serious, and the people living between the Pacific coast of Nicaragua and the Pacific highlands of Guatemala are in the direct path of what could become a generational flooding event for some communities. Cristina is still out there tonight, nearly stationary, drawing moisture from warm Pacific waters. The bands of rain are still forming, still moving, still training over the same terrain. The mountains are still receiving water that has nowhere to go. We do not know yet exactly what the next 18 hours will produce. The models have been suggesting the worst possibilities for days now, and every advisory from the National Hurricane Center has maintained the life-threatening language without backing down. The persistence in the official messaging is itself a signal. Forecasters do not use that language lightly. They use it when the numbers justify it, and right now, the numbers justify it. The storm is not finished. The rain is not finished. And for the families sleeping in the coastal departments of El Salvador and Guatemala tonight, this situation is still very much evolving,